Chapter 20, Section 2. American expansionism went west, all the way to Hawaii. Concerns even went as far west as China and Japan. But another area where expansionists were interested in was Cuba. Cuba is only 90 miles off the Florida Keys in the Caribbean. 90 miles from the United States is Cuba. And in the late 1800s, Cuba was full of all sorts of unrest, fighting, rebellions. Part of the reason why Cuba was only one of 2 Spanish colonies left in the Americas. Cuba was one, the other was Puerto Rico. The Cubans do not want to be ruled by Spain anymore, and they are going to launch a series of revolts against Spanish rule, trying to throw off the Spanish, unsuccessfully. What Spain would do is they would come in and they would find the leaders of these revolts and they would exile them. One of these important exiles is going to be a gentleman by the name of Jose Marti. Marti joined the rebellion when he was only 15 years old. He ends up getting banished to Spain. Spain did not want him in Cuba anymore, stirring up problems. So they banished him to Spain, where they can kind of keep an eye on him. Ends up earning a college degree, works in Mexico for a while, works in Guatemala for a while, but finds his way back to Cuba, where he gets exiled again. This time he's going to move to New York, where he continues to work for Cuban independence. He eventually encourages another revolt in 1895, but this time he is killed in the fighting. Spain's had enough of these revolts. Spain's going to put down the revolt, and General Valeriano Weyler is going to be sent in from Spain to get control of Cuba. And one of the ways he's going to do that is he's going to force thousands into concentration camps in Cuba. Because if they're in a concentration camp, they can keep an eye on them, and they can hopefully prevent people from helping with these rebellions. In these camps, though, 200,000 Cubans die from starvation and disease. All this was happening 90 miles from us. Many Americans saw what was going on in Cuba and were very sympathetic. I mean, Americans looked at this and they said, wow, this sounds a lot like our own American Revolution, a European power exerting control over us, and we wanted to rule ourselves, and we threw off England. It's the same thing that Cuba was trying to do with Spain. And so the U.S. press was actually encouraging war with Spain. The way they could do that is referring to Weyler as a butcher. Makes people think badly of him automatically without knowing anything he does. Telling all these different tales of Spanish atrocities, things that Spain was doing to people, even Americans, as you can see in that cartoon that's there on the bottom right. Which brings us to that right here, William Randolph Hearst. William Randolph Hearst is going to run a newspaper called the New York Journal. He is going to use something called yellow journalism to gain interest. Yellow journalism was this detailed, sensational reporting, meant to stir up people's feelings. Hearst believed the newspapers should shape what people think. Not just give you the information and let you decide for yourself, but should shape your opinions and policies. And Hearst was pushing for U.S. intervention in Cuba, even sending artists down to draw, pictures of what they saw. Its bottom line is this: he wants us to get into a war because a war sells more papers, gives us something more to report on. The president at this time was William McKinley. William McKinley was a veteran of the Civil War. He had seen some of the worst fighting the United States had ever been in. He does not want to lead us into another war over this. But some things are going to happen. February 9th, 1898, a letter from Enrique de Puy de Lome, Spain's minister to the United States, a letter from de Lome is going to be intercepted by a Cuban spy. The Cuban spy sees what the letter is talking about and immediately says, I need to get this to the United States people. This is going to stir them up. This is going to make them be on our side. One way to do that is he sold the letter to Hearst. Hearst puts the letter, the de Lome letter, in the newspaper. And the de Lome letter, it really kind of showed Spain's true intentions. Spain was calling McKinley weak, making fun of him, just kind of laughing at us. The letter outrages Americans. And the United States is literally going to be teetering on the brink of war. But we had not been pushed over the edge yet. A tragedy is going to occur that does push us over the edge. The USS Maine, a battleship, a light battleship, was hanging out in Havana, Cuba, in the harbor. It was kind of hanging out there because the United States had property, had citizens in Cuba, and the battleship was there just to kind of make sure if one of these rebellions broke out, that U.S. property and lives were protected. On February 15th, 1898, the Maine explodes, killing 260 sailors. Immediately, Spain is blamed. There was no proof that Spain did it, but immediately Spain is blamed. Now, side note, we know today that chances are probably that Spain didn't do this. We believe now there was probably a fire in the coal bin. Coal dust is very explosive, and that caused the explosion. But at the time, they jumped straight to the Maine was blown up by Spain conclusion. And the rallying cry is going to be, remember the Maine. Now, there was almost a chance for a peaceful solution. Weyler is going to be called back to Spain. The whole concentration camp policy is abandoned. McKinley really doesn't want to lead us into this war. McKinley sends a letter to Spain basically saying, you better, do this, or else. McKinley gets the message back from Spain that they would meet all of our demands, including an armistice with the rebels, possible self-rule for Cuba. But Spain is, or McKinley is getting tons of pressure. McKinley is getting pressure all around him, even from his own advisors that were pushing him towards war. One of McKinley's advisors, this is before he was president, was Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was Assistant Secretary of the Navy. And he is going to argue to McKinley, we need this war. We need this war to get, to prevent from getting, in Roosevelt's words, flabby. We have this military, and we're not using them. We better make sure they work. We better keep them going. And if we're going to advance our world mission, we better make sure they work. And this is a prime example for it, Roosevelt says. Other advisors say war would unite the nation around a cause. It may reduce demands at home for political reform, reduce demands for government regulations of businesses. But McKinley's under a lot of pressure. And on April 11th of 1898, McKinley asks Congress to intervene in Cuba. He fails to mention the fact that Spain had agreed to all of our demands. McKinley calls for war in the name of humanity, in the name of civilization, and on behalf of endangered American interests, we need to help Cuba and defeat Spain. On April 25th, 1898, Congress declares war on Spain.